Okay, this is an overview of the book, which is called The Psychology of Quality of Life, Hedonic Well-Being, Life Satisfaction, and Eudaimonia. Um, my name is Joseph Sergi. I'm a professor at Virginia Tech, and we've been reviewing some of those chapters, and let me give you an idea of where we're at. So we're in the subjective reality and its effect on happiness, part of the book, and we already, you know, um, discussed all of those preceding topics in other modules: philosophical foundations, definitions and measures, consequences of happiness, and objective reality and its effect on happiness. And now we're in the midst of that part of the book dealing with subjective reality and its effects on happiness. And to give you a little bit more information about where we're at in that part of the book, we discuss personality effects, the effects of affect and cognition. We also discussed the effects of beliefs and values, and we discussed also the effects of needs and need satisfaction. And we're up to that part of the book and dealing with the effects of goals. So again, the focus of this module is the effects of goal, and this is what we can be talking about. So this is what this module will be about. Okay, in talking about goals, um, if we look at some of the way of measuring life satisfaction, particularly life satisfaction, um, as as one of those constructs of what you call personal happiness, many of those measures are, um, have some sort of a life goal. So the idea is that, have you achieved your life goals? And if you have achieved your life goals, then the assumption is that you should be happy with your life. Um, Let me give you an idea of one of the very popular measures of life satisfaction, which is the Diener et al. Measure, which is called the Satisfaction with Life Scale. One of the items is, in most ways, my life is close to ideal. So again, the presumption is that uh, that people have an ideal conception of what their life should be, meaning a life goal. Um, and then if a person is very close to that ideal, that means they're happy with their lives. The same thing can be said with the Cantril ladder, which is again a very popular measure in quality of life and well-being research, and it's essentially a ladder that goes all the way. You're climbing up that ladder, and again, the presumption is that you are achieving your life goals, and depending on how far you climbed up that ladder, again, that would be reflective of your happiness in life. Okay, what we're going to talk about in this module is the extent to which people set their life goals, the way they go about it, because the way they set those goals have a lot to do with uh, with their personal happiness. Some goals have what you call a very strong positive valence. Other goals may not be as as strong and as positive, and therefore the realization or the consumption of those goals that have high positive valence is likely to generate much satisfaction compared to those goals that have low valence, low positive valence. So what we want to do is we want to talk about those factors related to goal valence, and the same thing can be said with goal expectancy. Again, if one would set certain life goals and they're not likely to be met. Again, what is the expectation that those goals are likely to be met? Then again, those goals are not likely to be attained, and therefore the satisfaction that comes out of goal attainment is uh, is likely to be not experienced. And if it's not experienced, then of course, then there wouldn't be much uh, contribution to personal happiness. Same thing can be said with goal implementation and attainment. The way people go about implementing the goal and attaining those goals have have to a lot to do with personal happiness. If one would set those very nice goals and they're realistic goals and ultimately go about not being able to implement those goals and attain them, then of course it it kind of defeats the purpose. They're not likely to experience much satisfaction. So what I want to do is we want to start out with talking about those factors related to goal valence. And as you can see from this slide, there's a whole bunch of factors based on the research in social psychology and personality, um, uh, dealing with goal valence and the extent to which the positivity of the goal uh, is affected by things, whether the goal is meaningful, whether it is intrinsic, whether it's more abstract versus concrete, versus whether the goal is of the hygiene versus motivational nature, whether the goal is approach versus avoidance goals, goals related to deprived versus non-deprived needs, goals that are autonomous or non-autonomous, and goals related to flow. So let's start out with the first one, meaningful goals. So the idea is that a goal is that has high strong that have high well high positive valence. That's what I mean. High positive valence is is a goal that is very likely to be a meaningful goal. Let me give you an example. Once people retire, they lose their sense of worth and their life satisfaction plummets. This is because their work related goals are very much connected to their identities of who they are. To maintain their sense of identity and hold on to meaningful goals, again, meaningful goals related to work, many retired people choose to volunteer their services for a good cause. Um, so again, the idea is you one has to pursue a life goal that is meaningful. And if they don't pursue that meaningful goal, let's say, for example, when people retire, they kind of lose that pursuit of a meaningful goal, and that makes them unhappy with their lives. Um, so there's much research that suggests that the meaningfulness of goals is very much related to the positive and strong valence associated with those goals. And ultimately, if they are realized, then they generate much satisfaction related to life at large. Effects of intrinsic versus extrinsic goals. Again, there's a we made the distinction, and just repeat the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic goals. Examples of intrinsic goals would include having good relationships with loved ones, making a significant contribution to the community, helping others in need, personal growth, and maintaining good health, so forth. In contrast, examples of extrinsic goals include the desire to make money, the desire to control people, the desire to attain social recognition, and so forth. So, much research has shown that intrinsic goals have high positive valence, while extrinsic goals may not have as much high positive valence, and therefore the realization of intrinsic goals are likely to induce much more positive affect and again a good amount of satisfaction that would spill over to life satisfaction than extrinsic goals. And again, the research, there's much research to substantiate this phenomenon. Another principle is related to abstract versus concrete goals. Some goals are abstract, where others are concrete, and still other goals may be in between. An abstract goal can only be implemented by transforming these goals into concrete goals. That is, abstract goals are strategic goals, concrete goals are tactical or operational goals. Strategic goals have to be operationalized into tactical goals for implementation. For example, a goal such as learning French can be attained by systematically and methodically working and attaining a hierarchy of subordinate goals. Thus, a low-level goal, such as memorizing a list of 20 vocabulary words, feeds into a higher level goal, such as practicing and the use of these memorized words in different situations, which in turn becomes increasingly instrumental in learning French. Although the attainment of every goal in the goal hierarchy generates a certain degree of satisfaction, satisfaction is experienced most intensely with the attainment of higher level goals than lower level goals. So the idea is, again, the realization of goals that are much more abstract in the goal hierarchy would induce much more satisfaction than, again, those goals at the lower levels of the goal hierarchy. How about looking at the principles of hygiene versus motivational goals? Now, there is much evidence in the literature suggesting that subjective well being is composed of two dimensions that are somewhat independent from each other, namely positive and negative affect. The factors affecting satisfaction, positive affect, may be different from the factors affecting dissatisfaction, negative affect. So, the goals inducing positive affect are very much related to what you call growth goals. And the goals related to negative affect are what we call hygiene goals. And this is based on Herzberg two-factor theory that is very popular in IO psychology. So the two-factor theory suggests that job satisfaction may be influenced by growth goals such as recognition and responsibility. That is, the presence of recognition and responsibility at work serves to contribute to additional job satisfaction. Conversely, the absence of these conditions does not contribute to dissatisfaction. In contrast, job dissatisfaction, on the other hand, is affected by hygiene goals, such as wages and physical working conditions. That is, attainment of these goals does not contribute to satisfaction. However, goal attainment contributes to dissatisfaction. Goal non attainment, contributes to dissatisfaction. Hygiene goals are related to lower order or basic needs, such as biological and safety needs, a la Maslow. In contrast, growth goals are related to higher order needs, such as social esteem and self actualization needs, again, a la Maslow. So, the two factor theory developed to explain job satisfaction is generalizable to all other domains to explain satisfaction in general. In other words, much of the research has shown that negative affect, like dissatisfaction, can be induced by failure to meet lower order needs such as biological and safety goals. Fulfillment of biological and safety needs do not contribute much to positive affect, i.e., satisfaction. Okay, moving right along to approach versus avoidance goals. So again, there's a distinction between approach versus avoidance goals. Um, the idea is that approaching goals and attaining them produce higher levels of subjective well-being than avoiding undesired goals. For example, a person may experience a higher level of well-being working toward making friends than avoiding being lonely. Perhaps this may be due to the fact that avoiding being lonely serves mostly to reduce negative affect, whereas making friends serves to generate positive affect. So again, there's a whole bunch of studies in social psychology, social personality psychology that have demonstrated this. And of course, it applies to subjective well-being. Um, how about the goals related to deprived versus non-deprived needs? Attaining goals related to deprived needs are likely to induce higher levels of subjective well-being compared to attainment of goals associated with satiated needs. Let me give you an example of a study that looked at economic deprivation. Um, Economic deprivation is a strong factor influencing materialism, the tendency to value money and material possessions. Poor people who attain wealth become so happy. This is because economic deprivation heightens the need intensity for money and material possessions. This argument can be extended to non-economic needs too. That is, need deprivation heightens the intensity of any need. In turn, those life domains and subdomains in which this need can be met increase in importance. As a result, satisfying a deprived need generates a great deal of satisfaction in those important life domains. This satisfaction, in turn, contributes significantly to life satisfaction. And again, there's much research that demonstrates this phenomenon. Um, Moving down the list to looking at autonomous versus non-autonomous goals. Subjective well-being has something to do with the extent to which personal goals are selected autonomously. Well-being could be enhanced when individuals are able to pursue their own distinct goals in ways that are intrinsically valued and autonomously chosen. That is, goals that are essentially determined by others, not the individual himself or herself, are not likely to be important goals. A typical example would be, let's say, you know, parents would um, force their children or talk their children into maybe going to college or selecting certain majors that they're not that the kids are not passionate about, and the kids of course have not made those decisions autonomously. So if the person would make the decision to go to college, yes, I want to do this, and yes, I want to major in so and so because this is my decision, not my parents' decision. The realization of those goals, again, would produce much more satisfaction than if the goal is set non-autonomously, or, for example, by one's parents. And again, there's much research to substantiate this notion. Finally, we have goals related to flow, and we talked about flow previously. Again, this flow theory that is very much uh, connected with physical activities. Um, so goals can also be related to flow in the sense that some goals, when attained, can generate feelings of flow while others do not. Goals related to flow have the power of generating higher levels of subjective well-being than goals not related to flow. So a review of the empirical literature concluded that there is indeed a strong relationship between these two constructs, i.e., again, um, the idea of flow and subjective well-being. If you're looking at things like challenging leisure activities like competitive sports, it contributes to subjective well-being much more so compared to passive passive forms of leisure activities such as watching television. Um, and again, the idea is those goals, if they are connected with with flow activities or the kinds of activities that would generate flow, that would, you know, the realization of those goals would produce a higher level of life satisfaction or subjective well-being than goals that are non-flow related. Um, okay, at this point, I think we discussed enough about those factors related to goal valence, or those factors that lead to a high level of uh, positive valence. And once those goals are realized, then they generate quite a bit of satisfaction that spills over to life satisfaction. We'll move on to talk about now goal expectancy. Goal expectancy is the extent to which a goal is likely to be realized. So, as much as one can set a goal that is high in positive valence, if it is not expected to be realized, then of course that defeats the purpose. Um, so here we're going to be looking at factors related to goal expectancy. And as you can see from this list, that there are a number of factors that we'll be talking about related, as directly related to goal expectancy. Adaptable versus non-adaptable goals, goals that are congruent versus non-congruent with cultural norms, effects of goals that are congruent versus non-congruent with personal motives, effects of goals that are congruent versus non-congruent with personal resources, effects of goals that are realistic versus non-realistic, effects of goal conflict. So the first one is adaptable versus non-adaptable goals. Again, we're talking about adaptive versus non-adaptable goals. Goals that are adaptable, they're essentially modifiable based on reality, are likely to be attained more than goals that are less adaptable. And if so, individuals with malleable life goals are likely to experience higher levels of subjective well-being than individuals with less malleable goals. Let me give you an example of a study dealing with attorneys. Um, Attorneys who have experienced a distinct transition, career became less important and family became more important. Those who recognized the change and reorganized their goals accordingly express significantly higher level of life satisfaction than those who fail to recognize the change and fail to adapt their goals. This tendency can be better explained using adaptation theory. Adaptation theory is very popular and again in social psychology. And the theory posits that goals reflect adaptations to the environment to the point that attaining goals do not produce much satisfaction. That is, people adapt to changes in their living conditions to the point where these changes do not make much of a difference in subjective well being. Even if subjective well being changes as a function of a change in living condition, the subjective well being effect does not last. After a while, people return to their stable set point. So again, that may explain the situation. The second, the second principle is very much related to congruent versus non-congruent cultural norms. Um, the idea then is goals most likely to be attained are those that are congruent with culture and cultural norms than non-congruent goals. Much of the I'll give you an example of research that is very much related to this, and that one example is related to the research in subjective well-being dealing with culture and specifically individualist versus collectivist culture. And the idea then, the finding from this kind of research is that uh, individuals express a high level of personal happiness uh, living in individualistic countries. Um, so if people who are individualist in orientation, they pursue achievement and self-esteem goals, and they live in an individualist type of country rather than a collectivist country, then yes, they experience what you call um, congruence with the cultural norms. And if so, then that kind of facilitates goal achievement and of course the satisfaction that comes from goal achievement. The same thing can be said with people living in collectivist society. Those people who score highly on collectivism, living in collectivist societies, they express a higher level of subjective well-being than those who um, have non-congruent goals with the cultural norm, meaning that they don't value social harmony as much. Um, there's another example that I'd like to very briefly talk about, and that is cultural differences between men and women, and that deals with marital status. Past research has shown that marital status and happiness are related in that married people are happier than unmarried people, and this relationship is moderated by gender. More specifically, married women are happier than married men and unmarried people in general. Why? Perhaps because of the cultural norm is women should find happiness at home, whereas men find fulfillment at work. This norm bestows status and prestige on women who are married. Women are socialized to value marriage more than men are, and they are more concerned about their appearance and fear of aging due to the pressure that they feel to attract a man for marriage. Women's identities are more tied to family identity than men. This is commonly referred to in the general socialization literature as the hierarchy of gender identities. So this is example of the kind of research that uh, uh, helps shed light on the idea of uh, that goals that are congruent with cultural norms are likely to be realized and therefore generate the kind of positive affect much more so than if these goals were non-congruent with cultural norms. How about personal motives, meaning what's the effect of goals that are congruent versus non-congruent with personal motives? Subjective well-being is not only dependent on goal attainment, but also the extent to which they are realized which the realized goals are congruent or incongruent with personal motives. One study, for example, college professors that one example that college professors are familiar with, and that is the college student whose motives are not congruent with educational goals. Many students are strongly motivated by social, love, and romantic needs. These needs sometimes interfere with the setting and attainment of good grades. Partying late nights interferes with completing important homework assignments and attending morning classes. Thus, educational goals are said to be incongruent with the social and love needs of many college students. This goal motive incongruence may cause students to perform poorly in college classes, thus preventing them from attaining their educational goals, obtaining decent grades in their classes. Failing to obtain decent grades leads to dissatisfaction in the education domain, which may spill over to life, causing life dissatisfaction. Ah, and again, much research was able to substantiate this principle. Effects of goals that are realistic. No, again, we're talking about goals that are congruent versus non-congruent with personal resources. Okay. So another goal expectancy factor is goal resource congruence. The concept of resources as used here is not limited to financial resources. It can be personal resources, as in health, traits, strategies, and abilities, um, as in personal resources, social resources, such as social networks and social support, material resources such as money, power, and status. So, subjective well being is not only dependent on goal attainment, but also on the extent to which the goals that are realized are congruent or incongruent with one's own personal resources. Those who have resources that match their goals are more likely to attain these goals and thus experience higher levels of subjective well being than those who do not match their goals with the resources. So again, much evidence uh, is in the literature to substantiate this principle too. Then we have realistic versus non-realistic goals. Individuals experience individuals experience greater satisfaction when they strive to attain goals that are realistic and attainably feasible than if these goals are not realistic and feasible. Again, a literature review provided much evidence that elderly experience a higher level of well-being than non-elderly. And the explanation for this is that older people tend to have lower and therefore more realistic aspirations, thus decreasing the goal achievement gap. Again, that explanation sheds light on the findings that, again, elderly tend to be much more satisfied with life than the non-elderly, and that could be a good explanation for that. Effects of goal conflict. Finally, we have goal conflict as another factor related to goal expectancy and its influence on subjective well-being. Life satisfaction is associated with consistency of life goals. The greater the consistency among goals regarding career, education, family, and geography, and the greater the life satisfaction. Goal compatibility, consistency, or lack of conflict accounts for much of the variance in life satisfaction. People who attempt to pursue conflicting goals simultaneously are not likely to end up attaining either goal. Hence, they may experience dissatisfaction with goal non attainment. So much evidence is available that is consistent with the goal conflict principle. Research has shown that goal conflict is associated with negative affect, neuroticism, depression, stress, psychosomatic complaints, and life dissatisfaction. Okay, we'll move to the third dimension of goals, and that is goal implementation and attainment. The question that we need to ask here is to what extent these two new goals are likely to be realized? What are the facilitators and inhibitors that may affect goal implementation and attainment? Satisfaction in any life domain can be viewed in terms of goal consumption. People who set goals, take action in pursuit of these goals, and attain them feel satisfied. Failing to attain their goals lead to dissatisfaction. So life satisfaction comes from goal attainment, and people who have developed effective strategies to attain their goals tend to experience higher levels of subjective well-being than those who have less effective strategies of goal attainment. Therefore, the primary determinant of domain satisfaction is essentially goal attainment, which in turn serves to satisfy those activated needs. So, what are those things that get in the way of goal implementation and attainment? One of them is goal commitment, whether you stick it out. Um, so, research has shown that satisfaction experienced in particular life domains is dependent on goal commitment. That is, the person has to be committed to the said goal. He or she has to allocate resources and engage in systematic action in an attempt to achieve the said goal. When people invest themselves in goals, they experience greater joy when these goals are met, and conversely, greater pain when they are not. So, again, much research indicates that goal commitment is a facilitator of goal attainment. And if one is not committed to the goal, and if a person runs, if the person runs into obstacles and hurdles, the idea is not to give up, is to stay committed to the goal pursuit. And if a person stays committed and with the eventual attainment of that goal, that leads to satisfaction, which spills over to life satisfaction in general or subjective well being. How about recognition of goal attainment? Goal attainment contributes to subjective well being only when it is recognized, when goal attainment is recognized. In other words, satisfaction from goal attainment can only be experienced when the person recognizes that they have attained the goal. Research on highly educated professionals have shown that those who are less satisfied with life never recognize their own accomplishments. Instead, they focused on the goals yet to be attained, and they judged themselves accordingly. Therefore, goal attainment contributes to subjective well being only and only if when the person comes to recognize it. Goal attainment without focal attention by the person does little for subjective well being. How about concrete thinking? Although abstract goals are likely to be more meaningful, people who do not know when they have attained these goals. Now, let me repeat that. Although abstract goals are likely to be more meaningful, people do not know when they have attained these goals. Abstract goals are hard to measure. Therefore, you do not know if and when the goal is achieved. In contrast, concrete goals are measurable goals. One can argue the extent to which he or she is making progress towards that goal. There is some research that supports what social psychologists call concrete thinking. We give you an example of a study that found that perceptions that life is meaningful and therefore worthwhile increase significantly with concrete thinking. Concrete thinking is thinking in exact measurable terms. Concrete thinking may be contrasted with fuzzy thinking. Concrete thinkers are very conscious of the measurable aspects of their abstract goals. Therefore, they can effectively gauge their progress towards goal fulfillment. Finally, we have goal progress. Being on the way to the goals and struggling to achieve them are is likely to be more satisfying than the actual attainment of the goals. That seems to be a phenomenon that, again, social psychologists have discovered over the years. There's research that suggests that much pleasure and enjoyment pursuing goals in an attempt to meet their needs, and that the pleasure derived from making incremental progress towards need fulfillment is intense and possibly equal or more intense than the pleasure derived from goal attainment per se. So that's the gist of what we're talking about in terms of goal progress, and that is one has to perceive that they're making progress, and that perception of goal progress is highly instrumental to feeling satisfied with the goal and ultimately spilling over to um, different life domains and ultimately life satisfaction. And this concludes our module on the effects of goals on happiness.